All right, today we have a very exciting talk about high return of investment testing in Angular. And I think this talk is really going to change your perspective on how to do testing. And you're going to come up with probably a brand new testing strategy and a new way of doing testing after this talk. So pay close attention all the way to the end. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going to cover my testing story because most of what I'm teaching and talking about is based on my own experience from working with many big Angular projects. Then I'm going to introduce the high return of investment testing strategy for testing Angular applications. We're going to cover Cypress component testing. We're going to look at the best practices, and we're going to dive into some code with a demo of how to test CRUD use cases in a to-do app. So let's get to it. But let's start with a quick hands up first. So you can type in the chat who here loves to write tests, who here is really living and dying for writing tests in your daily work. And let me also ask you who here spent a lot of time on testing and wish it was easier, wish there was a better way. Well, if that is you, I'm gonna cover how to do it in a simpler way, probably from what you're doing right now. Let me quickly introduce myself. I am Christian Ludemann. I'm an Angular consultant, speaker, trainer, blogger, podcaster, YouTuber. You know the drill. I'm from Denmark, and I currently mostly live in Barcelona, but I also I stay in Denmark part of the year when it's not too cold. I have a blog where I've written more than 100 Angular blog posts, so make sure to check that out. Also, I have some courses I sell on my site. I have my GitHub where I have a lot of code examples, including this one I'm gonna cover today. You can check out. And I have my Twitter where I tweet about new blog posts and new Angular tips. So you can go and follow me on Twitter. So yeah, my blog is at the moment I'm releasing a lot of YouTube videos as I find it's a good way to demonstrate specifically how to different Angular tutorials, how to do different stuff with Angular, so you can see every step of it. And I'm using new content every week. It's only practical and applicable knowledge you can apply today in your daily work. No fluff, and you can join more than 50,000 plus monthly visitors that go on my blog. And also I do this training course called Angular Architect Accelerator, where I'm basically hand-holding Angular developers to how to get promoted, getting a remote contract, or becoming a highly paid freelancer. So that includes 8 weeks of Angular architecture training. And once you have gotten the knowledge and you've gotten the results for your current client or current project or work, then I'm going to teach you how to use these results to basically market yourself and give you these results by getting promoted, because that is how I did it myself. And I have many students who took the course who has done that kind of transformation, got a remote job, being able to travel and live where they want to live, or make way more money by becoming a highly paid freelancer. I'm going to teach you all of that in the course here. And I have a free warm-up workshop. So I do a bunch of cohorts every year. And yeah, you can go to christianludemann.com/accelerator and you can sign up for the free warm-up workshop. There's no strings attached. I'll teach you the basics of how to operate as an high-end Angular architect, and yeah, you can take it from there if this is something for you. And yeah, let's get to the talk. So the background for this talk is a lot of Angular devs are experiencing testing problems, and they're frustrated and they're not getting the results for testing they should get. Because either they're spending too much time on testing with very little return, or they're writing tests altogether because they're not giving me the confidence anyways. So why bother? Why just not spend the time writing more implementation code? And traditionally, we have been taught about the testing pyramid, and basically that teaches us that the unit test should be the bedrock of testing, and then integration testing and end-to-end testing, and then finally manual testing. As these kind of tests in the upper part of the testing pyramid gets more and more expensive. And in this talk, I'm gonna show you a new way and show you why the testing pyramid doesn't work anymore, especially for front-end applications. So the project that really made this stick for me was once I was working on a big banking platform. So this cross platform banking app, but a platform for 8 of the biggest banks in Denmark. And on this project, we were like more than 50 developers working on it in a big monorepo. We had written more than 10,000 unit tests in a project, and we were, despite all these unit tests, still relying heavily on manual testing, and we basically had no confidence in the unit tests. And that is why unit tests alone don't really save you from all the problems that usually comes in the integration points. And that is the thing with the front end, because we have a lot of asynchronous stuff, we have a lot of interaction between components, whereas if you don't run in an environment that is similar to how the real user would run it, then you simply don't get the confidence you need to be confident in your tests. Unit tests still have a place in the project. I'm gonna show you exactly what it still can be used for, but only relying on it like we used to do in the testing pyramid doesn't work anymore. So the new era of front-end testing is made famous from Guillermo Rauch, who wrote the tweet, "ROI test, not too many, mostly integration." And then Ken C. Dodds from the React world, he did a talk on the same title, and he basically he created the testing pyramid, the testing trophy, which is about maximizing your return of investment on your tests by focusing on integration tests. Because at that time, if you run, so we figured out this middle sweet spot between end-to-end test and unit test, were basically making us black box test the whole application, and we got more confidence in our tests by running integration tests, which means we're running a whole part of the front end with no minimal stops in the front end, so everything is like the real implementation code, but we're mocking out the back end, because usually the back end is what gives end-to-end test the flakiness. So if we can do the whole, we can render the whole front end and mock out the back end, we're gonna get this perfect sweet spot where we're gonna get the maximum return on investment. So on our first implementation of this particular banking project, we were doing it with Jest. And we were setting up like our own framework to render the whole part of the app, so we can render a feature route, and that had some dependencies had some problems with dependencies. It had some problems with the whole setup of rendering the component, because Jest runs with JSDOM, which is not a real browser, so that is something that is giving you problems with the differences between what you expect to be in a real browser and what you have to fake in JSDOM. And also there's all the asynchronous stuff where Jest is not retrying commands and assertions like Cypress would, as we're going to talk about soon. But it still gave more confidence and with less effort. So we like this approach, but then Cypress component test came to the rescue and they eradicated all of these problems. So that's why I'm going to talk about Cypress component test now and how that can be used for this testing strategy. So basically the high ROI testing strategy I have put together from my experience with many big Angular projects that gonna give you the highest return of investment on testing is allocating tests basically inspired from the Kenzie Does testing trophy. And on the top we have a few end-to-end tests, smoke test. And I say smoke test because there's only gonna be a few and a simple proof that the app actually works. So that would be something like logging in to the app and asserting that you can see the dashboard or see the main homepage, something like that, and render that with all the backend dependencies. That is fine for now. And usually it's tempting to add more and more end-to-end tests, but that is also something that can break very easily, especially once there's instabilities in the environment you run it in, which is the case for many apps, that the testing environment is not the most stable. And then you end up disabling the end-to-end test on the CI, and then basically all values goes away. So I would definitely recommend keeping end-to-end test on a smoke test level, keep it simple and keep it very few. Then we have the bedrock of this testing strategy, which is the integration test, which are written with Cypress component testing. And that's gonna, render a whole feature component in the app, and basically make sure everything works by running a full use case test on the app. So basically we will cover all our use cases in the app with this strategy. Then we have the edge cases. We call the edge cases and calculations, where there's some business logic calculations with unit tests, because that's very fast and that is very good for this more like isolated tests. And then we're gonna maximize our static typing and use strict mode, because that is just something that is very inexpensive to set up and have running. So why not maximize it? So that is using ESLint and TypeScript. So let's see how to get started with Cypress component testing. So you can either go with plain Cypress, which is not too hard to set up if you have an Angular CLI project, or you can go with NX, which I recommend. I recommend NX even for apps that are not more robust, because it comes with a lot of build tools and a lot of cool features. And also later, when your app comes to a certain size, it's nice to be able to scale up using the NX library approach to run projects separately. So basically it just uses ng generate command, and it'll then on a certain project set that up with the Cypress component test configuration. And it's gonna read everything from the project and basically be ready to go with very little configuration code. So and there's these schematics for setting it up. And the ideal way to test write integration test. So here are the best practices I have figured out to get the best experience with this integration test based approach. So first of all, you want to run the same browser as your users, and that is in around 70% of the cases that's going to be Chromium based browsers like Chrome. You want to render a component through a route, and I'm going to call these steps in detail. You want to use something called ciphers for simple and independent test setup. You want to render a component on a test in a wrapper component. You want to use a dedicated test selector attribute like data test. You want to use standalone components, and you want to act and assert with the edges of the system. So minimal stops and maximum coverage of the test. And we focus on the use cases. So run the same browser as your users. So out of the box, Cypress supports the two Chromium browsers from Chrome or either the one from Electron. Most users use Chrome, so that is close to the real users versus using something like JSDOM, but in the Jest approach that you'll be using. So it's better to use a real Chrome browser. The test will run the same browser as the real app, and that gives us higher confidence, and it's going to be less brittle. Because sometimes in JSDOM there's some part of like the window property that is not available, and then it basically fails and you need to mock it out, which is, we want to minimize all the need for fakes in our integration test app on the front end. So render component throughout. To make the test as close as the implementation as possible, we render the router component using the router setup plus navigate. So that is as close as possible for, to what the user would do once they navigate to a certain route. And also our component tests are mostly based on either our smart components, which is our pages of the app, or our models of the app. So these smart components are the focus point of running our use cases through Cypress component tests. So by rendering the whole route using the navigate approach, we will trigger guards and resolvers just as in the real app. And then we would mock out on the network level on the responses, for example, when you fetch data. And more on how to do this in the code examples in the end. We have Cypress, which is an acronym for Simple Injectable Functions Explicitly Returning State. And it's basically a setup function that takes in the necessary input parameters we needed for configuring the test. Does the mounting and setups of dependencies using, for example, the Angular injector, and returns the dependencies needed for the test. And that approach here replaces before each setup logic. And it solves a common problem of having, when you have everything in before each, and then you realize later you need to do some specific configuration, you need configuration of a test, and then you cannot just have it all be set up in the same way. So you need to move the initialization logic down to the specific test cases. So that's going to solve this problem. I'm going to show you later how this would look. So we had this kind of setup function here, where we would have it take in the init to do items. It would mount the app with all the needed dependencies, like the router testing module for the routes, and then it would set up the dependencies like ng zone and router. This can be returned to the specific test cases, and it's gonna set up the backend responses, for example. So you can either go with just mock out the dependencies that is as close to the edge as possible, which is this resource service. Or you can, which is even better, use mock service worker, which can install a service worker which will mock on the network level. So you would actually fire the real HTTP request using HTTP client, for example, and it will mock the response. So it will be even better coverage, which is the better approach. Regarding that, currently there are some problems with running this with NX, using there's some asset paths that are not resolved correctly, but that is an issue that is resolved very soon, and then we can start using mock service worker with our Cypress component tests with NX. So that is the preferred approach, but this also is fairly good. It's fairly close to the edge as well. And then we do the default router navigate, and we return the router, so we can also do other navigations in the specific test case. Use a wrapper component. So I recommend setting up a wrapper, especially because it's needed for when we trigger the router navigate. We need a router outlet to render the component under testing. And also there could be other initialization logic we need to run before we render the component under test. For example, setting the language. Make sure we have translations so we don't just see the translation keys. Setting some config values on the window, like here. Yeah, so everything is set up correctly before we render the component under test. I recommend, and it's also one of Cypress best practices, to use a dedicated test selector attribute over, for example, using CSS ID or CSS class, because having a dedicated test attribute is not going to change for other reasons than the test, and it's going to convey that this element is used in a test. Whereas if you use the IDs and classes, it might change for styling reasons and break your tests, which you don't want. use standalone components, because since Angular 13, components can now import all the needed dependencies, which is is nice, because then you can make sure the component is mounted with all needed dependencies and you don't need to import anything else, and it's just completely self-contained, and there's no more need for ng modules this way. So here we can import, for example, we said standalone true, and then we can import shared module, and this pipe, which is also a standalone component, the due date today count pipe. So act and assert with the edges of the system. So to get the highest confidence, we act and assert like our real users would on the DOM. By interacting with the edges of the system, we black box test and make sure to exercise as much code as possible. Because sometimes assertions on network requests can make sense for asserting that the use case went successfully, like it got saved in the database. And you should focus on the use cases. And so the basic testing strategy is completing a full use case and not do some partial stuff. And it's completely fine to do multiple assertions in a test case. And you want to describe the test in like a BDD domain language way, rather than like a white box technical jargon. Like, for example, you rather write it should create to do item instead of it should save to do item in the store, because the store is like an internal technical jargon. So let's write a test for a to-do app. And yeah, you might think to-do apps is that not a little boring? Like everybody's doing to-do apps. Shouldn't I do like a pizza app or like a cooking app, like a movie app or something like that? And it's all CRUD apps. It's all the same thing. So I want to keep it simple here for the examples. So so it's easy to follow like the core of the practice here. So we start creating the Cypress setup. Input is to do items we can initialize the test with. We import the router testing module and app module. We set up the mock responses, and that ideally could be done using mock service worker very soon. We trigger navigation, so it will render the component on a test. We return the dependencies needed in the test case, and then also we have this wrapper component that is being mounted here, which contains a router outlet, and that can render once we do the navigation, because we have the router set up here. And then we navigate, and then we return the dependencies. Then we have create to do item, where in this test we are. And by the way, I will show you how this test runs in after this, so you can see exactly. And it runs very fast. So we have the type in some title. It's basic Cypress stuff. Nothing really changed here. We type some title, some description. We have some due date that is set for the to do item. We submit it, so it gets saved. It gets created in the DOM, and when we assert that it contains the different things. I use shadow here because we use an Angular material component, which is using shadow DOM. So to penetrate the shadow DOM, we need this shadow method. And show to do item, that is basically just using the Cypher initializer, and then we do the assertion like we did before. Very simple. Update to do item. Here we basically first make sure to set up something, have some to do item set up, and we go and edit it. Clicking the edit button, and then we can edit it in a form, and then we assert later that it's updated. I just for preserving the space, I cut out the assert part, but that is the same assert as we saw in the example. And then we have delete, which is basically initializing with something, and we're gonna click some delete button. We're gonna assert that it exists first, and then we're gonna click some delete button, and then we're gonna assert that it doesn't exist. So that is, you can see it in action here, how it runs all the CRUD use cases. So that's how you would think about this. You will look at what is the use cases. Every time you build a new feature, you'll be like, okay, well, what is the use cases when you read the user story? all of these use cases should be covered with Cypress component testing, and then that's how you get the highest return of investment on your testing. It's going to beat the end-to-end test, it's going to beat the unit test. This is going to be the bedrock of your testing. So wrapping up, we want to focus on integration test using Cypress component testing. It's a great tool for this. It's going to retry it, it's going to run stable, it's going to run fast even, a lot faster than Cypress end-to-end test even. You follow the best practices. I explained the 8 best practices, and you start enjoying less time writing tests and higher confidence in them. So thanks for watching. Slides will be shared on my Twitter at Chris Luderman. Yeah, we can go to the questions.